Welcome everyone to our Culture Days Tea and Talk here at Brody House Museum, where we invite you to grab a cup of tea from home and listen as we speak to local collectors who are going to be speaking about Victorian fashions and curious Victorian fashions from the period. We are speaking from Brody House Museum, which is the 1893 home of immigrants Gustav and Matilda Rody. It's located on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. With me right now, I've got Parker McIntosh, who is a local historical tailor. He made the blouse I am wearing today, which is an 1898 blouse from a historical fashion magazine that's German, and it's done authentically to replicate exactly what was there, right?
Yes.
So how long would something like this have taken to make?
That took me about 5 hours to put together, 5.5. So
Do a little turn around.
there's a lot of handwork in there, and the sleeves and finishing. I also made everything I'm wearing is reproduction. Some things like shoes I bought, but everything else is made by me.
Fantastic. So he uses, so are the materials as close to what would have been worn at that time?
As close as I can get, yes.
So this is a corduroy?
Yes.
And was this modern fabric or?
Well, it has some vintage aspect to it. I found it in a thrift store. I expect it's from probably the 1970s. So it's older, so a little bit better than what I can get now, but it's about as close as I can get.
So do most of the fabrics, like the fabrics that you use for your outfits, do you try to find like some authentic materials?
As much as I can, I try and find authentic reproductions. A lot of the pieces like tweeds, you can find older tweed pieces like my trousers and jacket, vintage or sometimes modern that will work. There's a couple really good suppliers of materials out there, so that's what I try and stick to, because I can have the same fabrics over and over. It's consistent. It's
Right.
I can rely on them,
And even helpful. Like the buttons and the fastenings are those things that are
buttons, fastenings are almost all antique, all original. So.
And you get those locally, or is that?
Locally, online, you can get whole jars of buttons often on eBay or yard sales. So those are always good sources.
Very nice. So how long have you been collecting for many years, and you started collecting and then started tailoring, or?
I think I've been collecting for about 8 or 9 years, and that's with tailoring. I started tailoring and collecting at the same time.
And how did you learn how to create things like this?
I'm entirely self-taught. From first, my mother showed me how to use the sewing machine, pretty much how to thread it, and then I was on my own and reading books, a lot of original books that I collect. That's primarily what I collect are tailoring manuals. From the earliest I have is 1837 up to about 1930s is the most modern.
Right, very interesting. And so normally, does it take you, like, to create pants, would that be a day's worth of work, and then shirts?
Shirts take a lot of work. Shirts, there's all the sleeves. Shirts are not my favorite thing to make, but trousers, from the log books that tailors have, I can see how long they expected to spend on trousers or waistcoats, vests, coats. So a coat, they expect anywhere between 40 to 80 hours, depending on the type of coat. Trousers are about 12 to 30 hours. Waistcoats are often around the same as trousers, sometimes a bit less. It really depends on the types of material, level of finishing. Buttonholes can add a lot of time, so if you have multiple buttonholes. So they also, in their lists, they say how long different parts of a garment should take. So different pockets, different sizes of buttonhole, different types of seam finishing for different types of garments. So you could add them all together, all the different features to get the outcome and the length of time to make something. They also give how much the tailor should be paid.
I was gonna say, yeah.
This is all keeping in mind that it's probably a shop with many different people working, so multiple tailors. So sometimes you have multiple tailors working on the same garment. Often coats are made in half, so they can break times down into half a coat. And,
Interesting. So I guess that way a tailor would be able to know how much to charge because it's been broken down. They know how long it takes to do a garment, and very interesting. And even so, you also have done hats and things. Is this?
yes, I made this cap. I don't really do hats. I've repaired hats, but I will make soft caps, which is just, again, it's working with cloth sewing. The making of hats is a lot more complex and different kinds of work opposed to making a cap.
Interesting. So then this is all from your collection?
Yes, everything here on the mannequin is from my collection. I've put it together for the 1890s, right about 1897 to 99, right in there is the window of all this clothing. And that's to keep with the time of the house, so it would be appropriate for here. I've also tried to use as many local pieces as possible, though that can get a bit difficult. I know the coat is actually American, but that's at least in keeping with being from North America.
Is it easy to find locally made Victorian pieces that were done from the period, or is that?
Not here in Vancouver, really not in Canada. It's difficult too. Mostly I can find things from Toronto and Montreal, but most of what I try and collect is British, English, Scottish. That's a specific type of tailoring I'm very interested in the United States or Europe, Germany, France. They use a slightly different techniques, styles of tailoring. So I try and collect British. I figure it's probably the closest to what we would have had in Canada is probably British with some American techniques.
And what's the difference between, like, you're able to tell that this was an American jacket, but how, is it the shape or is it the construction inside?
It's the label in the back.
Oh, so
it has a name and a
Obviously.
date. It's Chicago 1898 is the coat.
But does it have a different look than the British?
This one not so much. Some of them really do. There's some that have really American features, which is hard to point out here. But I do know that, especially for trousers, I've done a lot more research into the making of trousers, and right away I can look at features, whether the waistband is cut onto the trousers or grown onto the trousers, or whether it's cut off and seamed on, different types of seam finishing, different kinds of lining, and materials, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So are these trousers Canadian?
To my knowledge, they're probably British. It's really hard to say. There's no name or anything, so they're undated. They could be from Canada, Britain, somewhere in there.
Okay.
Seeing that they were found locally points to them at least being from somewhere around here, but people travel so much.
So would this be like there goes our clock, historic clock. Would this be a regular day-to-day outfit, or is this something that someone of a higher class would have been wearing, or?
So as to the formality, this is what would be called a morning suit or formal day wear. The morning suit by the early 1900s really solidifies into a specific uniform of striped trousers, a morning coat, specific colors or patterns of waistcoat, and specific tie colors. But at this point you have a little bit more freedom, and so it would have been worn for business wear. Depending on your social class, this may have been your daily outfit. So there's some different sort of situations in which you would wear it. Now this usually gets worn, if you ever wear it, it's usually for weddings, a morning suit.
Right.
But you would see bankers or managers of shops and things wearing stuff like this. It's a morning coat having a waist seam in it means it's a body coat, so it's similar to the frock coat that would have hung straight down and had a long full skirt. This has a cutaway, but there's also the tail coat, or really a dress coat that has the cutaway for evening wear.
Right.
What I'm wearing is what people often call a sack coat, or a lounge coat is what they would have referred to it as in the period, and in a dark fabric like this. It would have also been appropriate for business wear, but perhaps maybe not something like a bank, or perhaps for if you were a clerk at the bank, lower down, you probably would have worn a lounge coat like this, or if you were probably in a clothier's shop or something less formal out in Vancouver Frontier, sack coat would have worked fine. But for any formal business wear, like lawyers and bankers, they would have had one of these.
So I guess Gustav Rodi would have, this is something that he would have probably worn as a
He
shopkeeper?
probably would have had one at least for formal events, possibly as a shopkeeper, or as long as he's not doing any labor. I know he was a bookbinder, so if he was actually binding books, this would have been far too formal for that.
Right.
But also as time goes on, clothing gets more casual. So in the 1880s, very likely he could have had a morning coat like this, but in a more casual fabric that he may have worn, but in dark colors with the striped trousers, it's quite formal.
And with this, so is this something sort of in fall and winter, and in summer it would have, or even in summer this would have
Year
been?
round, yes.
Okay.
Uh,
And then fabrics, so if it's something that's tweed, if you're wearing a tweed, would that be, also would you have been able to wear tweed to work? Or is
Tweed, well, it would have been a year-round fabric, but depending on where you were. Here in Vancouver, it's a frontier town, tweed in town would have been acceptable. But if you were, say, in London, it would have been far too casual. Tweed was reserved for the country, or if you were really low class and you didn't have other clothes. So you would have kept with a formal suit for in town and tweed in the country. But here, town and country, they're all the same thing here. So
Interesting. And then would you be able to sort of break down what is on here? So the jacket and sort of the layers underneath that?
So yes, we have the 3-button morning coat, pretty typical with its high buttoning, very high collar. Underneath we have the waistcoat. This is a single-breasted no-collar vest. They really they didn't have a preference as to vest or waistcoat. They're used entirely interchangeably.
So what's the difference between vest and waistcoat? That's
It's entirely interchangeable. It's just 2 different names for the same thing.
okay.
But here we have, the 4 pockets. Some of the buttons have been replaced with plain black buttons, but you can see the originals were a glass button with copper swirls worked into them. So it's fancy glass work for the buttons, but unfortunately 2 of those have gone missing. The 4 pockets for anything you might need, there's mention of keeping 1 pocket reserved for your watch, 1 for a penknife, and then 2 for different denominations of coins, as to how to organize your pockets, though it was really personal preference. Of course, we have the striped morning trousers, pretty typical for the 19th century, though trousers came in many different patterns, fabrics, materials, but morning stripes, as they're called, or cashmere stripes, very, very common and popular at the time. The tie is a silk pre-tied, often called a puff tie. It has a band that slides through the knot and hooks on a little pin.
So they wouldn't have to tie it.
So you wouldn't
like
have
that.
to tie it. It was for the ease of tying them, they came in all different qualities, so they weren't just cheap pre-tied ties like you find now. There were some very high-end ones. This one is a pretty good one here. In a plaid like this, I think I got this one in Montreal.
Okay. Is that a local, or is that a Canadian tie, or is that?
I believe so. I believe it would have been made in Montreal. There were a lot of stiff collars and ties made in Montreal. Were a lot of clothing. It was a big clothing center for Canada.
Interesting.
And just to show you a little bit how that kind of works a little bit more is you have that, and so it's all sewn together just like that, and you have a band. This one uses a buckle at the back, so you just thread it through and then you can around your neck,
And then that just tucks in.
and that tucks in, and then you can use just for decoration, or sometimes this one has loose ends, so if you wanted those loose ends to stay still, you could use a tie pin like this one here, which is also probably from Montreal or Quebec City. It's a little snowshoe and toboggan, so very Canadian.
Oh.
And that would have likely been a souvenir from one of the carnivals, one of the winter carnivals or snowshoe races. So it could have been a souvenir. Victorians were very, very fond of souvenirs, though it could have also been a prize for winning a race, because the snowshoe races at the carnivals, you could win colorful ceinture fléchée, the sashes worn in Quebec. Tie pins are mentioned. Often medals are the most common. Sometimes tankards. Many different sort of prizes for winning races.
Oh, interesting. So was the tie pin sort of a way for people to kind of have a little bit of eccentricity, or?
It really depended on personal preference. There are very extravagant tie pins. Different sizes are fashionable at different times. The 1840s, they get very large, and skulls, crossbones, kind of macabre things are very popular in the 1840s and 50s. A lot of that I think has to do with, again, with the popularity of Gothic and Edgar Allan Poe.
Okay.
So that was popular then. Into the 1890s, you get a lot smaller pins that are little, really wonderful pieces of jewelry and ornamentation, but they aren't quite as loud. They don't stand out so much.
Okay, so more delicate.
Yes.
Yeah. Did they ever have anything really unique in that period too? Like anything strange?
I know what you really
Yeah.
wanted to mention is
that I've seen
teeth.
online, maybe.
Teeth were common.